From the St. Francis Yacht Club in San Francisco, this is the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon, hosted by Ron Young.
Welcome to the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon, live from the virtual grill room of the St. Francis Yacht Club. Our speaker today is from Hawaii, and all of us who've sailed in the ocean cannot believe how much more junk, specifically plastic junk that lasts a long time, is in the water. Thank God for the likes of Kevin O'Brien, the president of Papahānaumokuākea. The Papahānaumokuākea National Monument, a little-known region of Hawaii. And even though I've raced to Hawaii multiple times, I did not know about this region, consisting of 10 uninhabited islands and coral atolls north and northwest of the main archipelago of Hawaii. It stretches a whopping 1,200 miles off to the northwest, and it's literally 3/4 of the length of the overall Hawaiian archipelago. And this incredible area contains 70% of all U.S. coral reefs and is home to 14 million seabirds. It's an incredible critical habitat for 23 endangered species. And thanks to Kevin and his crew, they're doing something about this. His whole effort to build community support while removing junk from paradise is a fascinating subject. So Kevin, welcome to the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon.
Thanks for having me. It's a great pleasure. I myself am a sailor, and so I'm pretty excited to be talking to a group of sailors. Most of the time it's school kids, which are important too, but talking to fellow sailors is really something I'm pretty excited about. I'm the president and founder of the Papahānaumokuākea Marine Debris Project, which is a nonprofit based here in Hawaii, and we focus all our work in a very particular area of Hawaii. But I did first want to share this photo of you. This is me 15 years ago in your neck of the woods, sailing my 36-foot Union cutter under the Golden Gate Bridge as a 23-year-old novice, essentially, sailing back to Hawaii. Probably something, looking back at it, I shouldn't have done without a little bit more work on the boat. When you're 23, that's just what you do. So anyway, really enjoyed sailing briefly in the bay there, and did get to visit your wonderful club just walking by down the wharf. And so you guys have a tremendous location and just what an incredible spot. And so really happy to be here. Since that time, I've spent all my years in Hawaii, and I've been here about 20 years total. So we're going to start off here first of all. So we run a nonprofit and we clean up the ocean. And I think that people these days get fatigued from too many bad environmental issues. You know, there's always bad headlines and that sort of thing. And so for us, cleaning up marine debris is just one action that we can take, that we can actually make a difference here for this very particular area of Hawaii. There's problems like climate change, ocean acidification, coral bleaching, all this stuff like that. But marine debris is tangible. And at the end of the day, after you've cleaned a reef or you've cleaned a beach, you have a big pile to show for it. Our nonprofit is based in Honolulu, Hawaii. As it says in the name, we clean up the ocean. That's a no-brainer. But our organization is a little bit different. And I think that many people today suffer from environmental issue fatigue. You know, there's always doom and gloom on the TV about the next environmental issue. And Hawaii in particular is facing, you know, so many of those. Marine debris is one of those things that we can actually have a direct impact on today. And at the end of the day, you have a big pile to look at and a clean reef to look at. And in Hawaiian, that's a concept called makaluhi, which is basically like looking with tired eyes upon something that you've done. And so for us, cleaning up marine debris is the one tangible thing we can do for this very particular part of Hawaii. So I wanted to introduce you all to this place, Papahānaumokuākea Marine National Monument, which in my humble opinion is the most incredible place on the planet. Here's an aerial shot here of one of the reefs at Manawai, which is a large coral atoll towards the end of the Hawaiian chain. So here's a map of the Hawaiian island chain, and you've all seen the main Hawaiian islands down there in the right corner. The Big Island, Maui, Molokai, Oahu, Kauai. But what most people don't really realize, and in fact, many people who have spent their whole lives in Hawaii don't even realize, is that the Hawaiian island chain stretches for over 1,300 miles beyond the main populated Hawaiian islands. And this is the region that we're talking about. And this is Papahānaumokuākea Marine National Monument. And so there's about 10 or so islands, coral atolls, open ocean reefs, all uninhabited, no permanent population except Midway, which I'll talk about later, and a vast amount of ocean. This national monument is over 580,000 square miles in size. And so you're talking about overlaying it on the United States, it stretches from, California to New Orleans. It's an enormous area and a place that not too many people really know. And so I really wanted to introduce it to you because I think it's incredible. So as you can see on this map, there's a dividing line in the middle, across the middle, that separates the upper half with the blue from the lower half with the yellow. And ancient Hawaiians were incredible navigators and astronomers. And so this line is actually the Tropic of Cancer. Not only is it the Tropic of Cancer that has so much significance just cosmologically and navigationally, but it's also a cultural distinction in that in the blue area near the top of the map, and of course, most of Papahānaumokuākea Marine National Monument is the realm of Po, which is the realm of the dead, which is the realm of birth and death and darkness and where things come from and where things go when they die. And this is a central narrative in Hawaiian cultural stories about the creation of the Hawaiian Islands and the Hawaiian people. And then in the yellow half of the map, which includes the main Hawaiian Islands where everyone lives, that is the realm of Ao, which is the realm of living and light. And so we have this really interesting narrative that's not only tied to just a line of latitude, if you will, but also to this incredible, cultural story. And so this area, Papahānaumokuākea, in those narratives gave rise to the Hawaiian people and the Hawaiian island chain. And so it's a sacred place. And so going into this place is not just, island hopping between beautiful uninhabited locations. It takes on more of a weight when you consider those cultural elements. So I'm going to introduce you to each island going up the chain here, starting with Lalo, which you can see right there in the middle of your screen, just after you cross up and over the line into the blue area. And this is also known as French Frigate Shoals. So this is the biggest coral atoll in the National Monument. And lucky for us, it doesn't actually accumulate much marine debris.
How big is it? What are the dimensions?
This one is a little over 20 miles north to south, I believe. So it's a pretty decent sized coral atoll with several smaller sandy islands scattered around. And this is where over 90% of the Hawaiian green sea turtle population comes to nest. And so you can see on these tiny sand islands, just this incredible booming population of green sea turtles that have come here to nest. Really a special place in that regard.
Does it ever totally go underwater?
Yeah, these small sandy islands, they might have small shrubs or, a little bit of vegetation on them. And during bigger storms, like for instance, Hurricane Walaka, that passed through in 2018, this island that you're seeing here in this picture right now was washed completely away by this storm. So they're very dynamic. You come back from year to year and the shorelines and the shapes of these islands have shifted completely. So really, really fragile terrestrial ecosystem here. And as we move up the chain, this is Kamoku Kamohoali'i, which translates to Island of the Shark God, or in English, this is Maro Reef, which is, this is a ship killer right here. There's a handful of shipwrecks that are known to have wrecked here from the 1800s all the way through modern times. But there's no emergent land here. It's all beautiful, brilliant coral reef that comes to within about a foot of the surface. And this is a hotspot for derelict fishing net or ghost net accumulation.
So in other words, this is always underwater by a foot or two all the time.
That's right. There's a good population of Hawaiian monk seals that live here at this place, and they don't have too many places to haul out and rest. At low tide, there might be a couple of reef shelves here and there that are slightly dry, and they'll be able to haul out and take a nap on those. But for the most part, they're out of luck. They're swimming. So what you can see here on this map right now is about 8 miles across from east to west. And this is a picture here of what that reef looks like when we're out in the boats and in the water. You can see one of our swimmers there in the background. Moving on up the chain. This is Kamole, or Laysan Island, which is a large uplifted limestone shelf. So this is not an atoll, if you will, that has a hypersaline brackish water lake in the middle. And this is just a hotspot for terrestrial wildlife diversity. There's an incredible bird population, native plant communities that live here. And this island suffers from a terrible problem with shoreline marine debris. This is the place where stuff washes up on the beaches. And the reef area is relatively small.
What's the size?
So the size, it takes about 2 hours to walk around it. It's about 7 miles in circumference for this place. And here's a great shot of the hypersaline lake in the middle of the island. And it looks inviting, but I think it would have been a really rough place to be stranded on as a shipwrecked sailor back in the 1800s.
How high above sea level is the highest part?
The highest point of this island is about 40 feet. There's a couple areas where there's some old sand dunes, vegetated sand dunes that, that bring that height up to about 40 feet. But for the most part, most of the island is, 10 feet, 20 feet off the ground. This is probably one of the higher islands, in fact, as well.
And that lake that's in there, is that salt water that washed up, or is that fresh water from rain? What is it?
Yeah, it's a freshwater lake that is mixed with the saltwater table, and so it's this brackish hypersaline. You float around in it, super buoyant, like you're in the Red Sea kind of thing, if you were to go float around in it. And there's little brine shrimp and stuff that call this place home, and so it's a really interesting spot. And this is about 750 miles from Honolulu, to give you a perspective of the distance here in this place. So it takes us about 4 days on the ship just to get to this place, to even begin working. Moving on up with just a short overnight sail from Kamole is Kaupo, which is Lisiansky Island. And this one has some shipwreck stories as well. Many, many sailors over the years from the early 1800s all the way through the early 20th century have wrecked on the reef here. There's an enormous reef shelf that stretches for about 10, 12 miles to the south of the island that is called the Neva Shoal. And this is a very shallow area that you'd never see it in the middle of the night. But this island really is also a hotspot for shoreline accumulation of marine debris. And here's a shot of Lisiansky Island, which, as you can see, is super low. This is very low. And so this one occasionally is washed over in certain parts with, high tides and big winter storms and that sort of thing. So a very dynamic island as well.
What size?
This one's about a mile. I believe it's about 1.5 miles in length, north to south.
Small.
Quite small. We can walk around it in an hour. And then moving on up the chain, about 1,100 miles from Honolulu, this is Manawai, which is Pearl and Hermes Atoll. And this was named in an unfortunate set of circumstances in 1822 when the whaling ships Pearl and Hermes, which were British whalers, one of them ran aground in the middle of the night, signaled the other one. The other one came in to try to help, and they ran aground as well, right there on the south end of this atoll. And so this is a huge atoll. It's almost 20 miles east to west. And as you can see, you have the big barrier reef. You have small sandy islands scattered throughout the perimeter, but then in the interior of the atoll, you have this enormous calm lagoon that's filled with beautiful coral beds. And so this is an aerial photo of that lagoon. And you can see the beds of beautiful yellow finger coral, which is what's primarily consists of in there. And as you can imagine, if a ghost net or a chunk of derelict fishing gear washed into this area, how easy it is for it to get snagged up. And so for that reason, this atoll is the #1 hotspot for marine debris accumulation in all of Papahānaumokuākea. So this is an aerial shot of the barrier reef. And so at the bottom of the photo is the deeper water and the offshore waters as it's getting shallower. And you can see that beautiful tongue and groove pattern that the water creates as it washes up to the top of the reef crest where the white water is there, and then is sucked back into the deeper areas. And so you have these really neat formations that develop there on the barrier reef before you get into the calmer waters of the lagoon. Okay. And you have large sand flats that are developing inside these atolls as well, that are just incredibly beautiful on a calm day. Moving up to the second to last location within Papahānaumokuākea is one that I'm sure everyone's heard of, and this is Midway Atoll. In Hawaiian, it's Kuaiheilani is the Hawaiian name for this. And this is famous from the World War II battles. As you all know, it is now a National Wildlife Refuge, in addition to being part of the monument, and a historic site for the historical resources from the battle. So Midway is a really interesting place because you have this really interesting juxtaposition between just incredibly abundant wildlife. Midway has over 1 million nesting pairs of Laysan albatross. And so during nesting season, you can't even walk around any of these islands without getting into the proximity of a snapping albatross chick. And it's stunning in that sense that the abundance of wildlife there is amazing. But then you have an aging infrastructure from World War II that is sort of collapsing down around all of this, with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service really working hard to strike a balance between maintaining the infrastructure for a field station and an emergency runway for trans-Pacific airline flights, and also being able to sort of reclaim many parts of this atoll just for the wildlife. And here's a historic hangar that went through the Battle of Midway. You could even see, bullet holes in the roof from this battle. And over the last 3 years, it went from being an intact structure to this. And so you have this really interesting juxtaposition of old infrastructure and wildlife. And here we are cleaning up the shoreline at Midway, and you can see old rusting seawall from the World War II days. And in that sense, it's just a fascinating place. So moving on up to the very last location within Papahānaumokuākea, this is Holaniku, or Kure Atoll. And much like Midway, it's a perfectly round, gorgeous coral atoll that once had some infrastructure on it from the military days. And so you can see down in the lower right there, the one main island, Green Island, has a runway on it. It used to have a Loran station, in fact, up until just a couple decades ago, and the Coast Guard had a presence as well. Now this atoll is managed by the state of Hawaii, and they're attempting to restore as much of this as they can back to pre-infrastructure days. And so here's an aerial.
So these islands don't really have trees on them very much. They have low brush on them. Describe what the terrain is like.
Almost all these islands are completely made of sand or coral rubble. And so not a whole heck of a lot can grow on sand, but the native species that have adapted to it do quite well. So there's a handful of native shrubs, vines, and then small trees, and then also some invasive trees that have sort of taken root in certain places that are slowly working on restoring these terrestrial habitats to their native vegetation. But as you can imagine, it's so remote, it's very expensive to do any kind of invasive species eradication up here. And so very, very tricky.
How fine is the sand?
It varies from island to island and from different spots on the island. And so it can be powder sugar fine all the way up to very chunky, made of big coral beads kind of thing. And so it really, really varies. Really interesting place.
Geologically, how old is this atoll, this whole formation up here? 1,200 miles.
Holaniku here, Kure, is at the end of the chain of emergent land. And I believe they say that Kure is about 28 million years old. You better double check that statistic, but it's somewhere in that vicinity of 28, 30 million years old. Whereas Oahu is much younger than that. It's only, 3 million. Kauai might be 5 million years old. So this is some pretty ancient stuff. And they've done rock coring in the lagoons of these atolls. At Midway, they did this and they found basalt rock. I think it was less than 2,000 feet below the surface. But at that point, the island has subsided that far by the time we get up here to the end of the chain. That was an introduction to most of the locations that we visit within Papahānaumokuākea to conduct our work. Yeah, so we've now arrived at the very northwestern corner of the Hawaiian chain. And I just wanted to hopefully communicate to you all what an incredibly special place it is. First of all, you have that cultural element that really plays into the place, and you feel that element when you're on the ground in Papahānaumokuākea. But honestly, I tell people it's like stepping back in time. There are very few places on Earth, I think, where you can go and the wildlife that you see may have never seen a human. And so this is one of those places where you can land on the beach and a seabird who has no business doing so will come and land on your head because they may have never seen a person. You can have big 100-pound fish swimming around your ankles when you're wading in knee-deep water. You can visit a beach and literally not be able to walk because there's so many sea turtles, or where you can just sit in your boat and witness tiger sharks eating birds out of the water. In this case here, it's a tiger shark eating a Laysan albatross fledgling that hasn't quite learned how to fly yet. Every day there is just like National Geographic. Everybody's heard of this issue of marine debris and everybody's seen the photos. You've seen it on social media. What hopefully our organization can offer to the general public is sort of a window, a snapshot, if you will, into a place where almost daily you get to witness the interaction between marine debris and protected wildlife. There's marine debris down here in the main populated Hawaiian Islands. And you might see it on a beach walk, Kailua Beach in the morning, but you don't see that piece of marine debris interacting with the endangered monk seal, or you don't see a sea turtle tangled up in that net, or you don't see that seabird chick picking up that piece of plastic off the beach next to it. or its parents feeding it plastic from offshore. You don't see that. And we, when we're up here in these islands cleaning this up, we see that daily, hourly sometimes, it depends. Yeah. So here's that place. So I introduced you to Papahānaumokuākea, 10 uninhabited islands and atolls, incredible wildlife, incredible cultural story, but no one can go there. It's a highly regulated place. You have to apply for a permit for either a research activity, a conservation activity, or a cultural activity. And aside from that, there's no visitation, no recreation, no private boats are allowed. Sorry, sailors, you can't go cruising in Papahānaumokuākea.
This is remarkable. So you actually, if you were to sail there, you'd learn you can't come here. You're not permitted to come ashore, do all this. Because this is
you'd have the Coast Guard buzzing you in no time if you decided to sail up into these islands.
Okay.
So very protected. It's a place that's really just at the end of the day, kind of at the far end of the spectrum in terms of protected areas, in terms of this is just for the wildlife.
Great.
So our struggle as a nonprofit is how do we, clean up this place? How do we build a community of people who are interested in stewarding this place when no one can go there? And so all we can do really is give presentations like this and show you photos and tell you heartfelt stories, because at the end of the day, I think Jacques Cousteau said it, but it's an old cliche, but you protect what you love. And if you don't know about it, if you don't know it exists, like many people, you can't love it. And so here we are working to build sort of a grassroots community of people that know about this place and may appreciate it for all its incredible facets. So now to hit you with the doom and gloom, here's the problem. So this is a endangered Hawaiian monk seal. This is kind of a typical beach in Papahānaumokuākea, unfortunately. There's no one up there to clean this up on a daily basis until we head up there a couple times a year and do the work. But unfortunately, where this place lies within the North Pacific, and here's your oceanographic map for all of you sailors, you've all heard of the Eastern Pacific garbage patch, the North Pacific subtropical high, which if you're doing the Transpac, you guys try to avoid that like the plague. But this is kind of what's going on here. So you can see Hawaii there in the middle of the map, the Eastern and Western Pacific garbage patches. And then to the north of the Hawaiian island chain there is the subtropical convergence zone. And so this is kind of an interesting region. You have a lot going on there. A lot of, you have deep water and surface water mixing. You have chlorophyll gradients. You have temperature changes. It's a very productive zone. So most of the seabirds in Hawaii head up there to that region to feed. But just by virtue of those conditions, it just makes a perfect suction zone, if you will, for marine debris in the North Pacific. And so, Hawaii is kind of surrounded on all sides by these collection zones for marine debris. And then in the case of Papahānaumokuākea, which is further to the north than the main Hawaiian Islands, seasonally in the winter, and especially during El Nino events, this convergence zone gets pushed south. And so then the islands of Papahānaumokuākea kind of filter all that out like a big comb. And so we suffer from an incredibly bad problem with marine debris in those uninhabited islands. And it's really out of sight from the people that live in the main islands here in Hawaii. So
the currents and the breeze blow the debris across these areas. And as it does so, they get trapped by these atolls and these coral formations, like a filter, like you said.
So obviously here's a shoreline, and the problem here and the way we deal with it is two faceted. So there's marine debris that accumulates on the shorelines, and then there's debris that accumulates on the water on the reefs. And so we do deal with that in two different ways, but I just wanted to illustrate this problem to you with some of these images. So here's a black-footed albatross chick. They tend to nest on the beach. And as you can see, like, how are you going to find a good place for a nest when this is what you're dealing with here? Same with the turtles. Sometimes they have an issue finding an ideal nesting place because there's so much clutter on the shorelines. And you may have all seen the famous photo of a dead albatross with all its stomach contents laid out. And I'm going to show that to you next here. But this is the reality. We find carcasses like this all the time. Seabird chicks that have been fed plastic by their parents and die as a result of not having enough room in their stomach to retain and digest real food. And so at Midway alone, I might add, every year, parents of albatross chicks bring 5 tons to the interior of those islands just at Midway, just in plastic. And they do that by feeding their chicks. And so chick dies and it leaves its carcass, and then there's more plastic on the ground in the vicinity of the nest for other chicks to get curious about and to pick up. And so it's kind of a self-spiraling cycle with this plastic and the way that seabirds deal with it. This is a shot we just took 2 months ago. Here's an Eva bird playing with a plastic bottle, just found it on the beach. They also steal your hats, I might add, when you're walking down the shoreline. They're mischievous guys. The most endangered pinniped in the world, which is the endangered Hawaiian monk seal, of which there are only a little over 1,500 left. And interaction with debris is a daily occurrence for them on the shorelines and in the water. So here's our team. I'm going to talk a little bit later about how we do this work, but for the shoreline debris, it's pretty simple. You head up there and it's a beach cleanup. So you pull together the big team and you walk the beaches and you pick up. For us, we focus on entanglement hazards. And so there are, hundreds of tons of plastic on the shorelines there. But when you look at the, most intense threat to the wildlife, it's usually the ghost nets. And they can, cause entanglement threats for the birds as well as the turtles and seals. So we focus our time up there on the shorelines, at least, with the ghost nets. And these things can be monstrous and buried in the sand and very difficult to manipulate, difficult to cut, difficult to get offshore into a waiting boat. Some of these shorelines are difficult and inaccessible, and you might have rocky shelves or surf. And so we put together a crack team of people every time we head up to Papahānaumokuākea. It's just the cream of the crop in terms of people that can get this work done well. Here we are cutting a derelict fishing net on the beach. Sometimes they're so large that you can't load them in the boat in one go and you need to cut them into pieces. Here's also a daily occurrence.
Chainsaw, what do you cut them with? Chainsaw would be too difficult. Got to be knives. So,
yeah, we've experimented with all sorts of cutting techniques over the years, and it's tricky. You get a big bundle of net that's just so amorphous, and the strands aren't all the same tension, and trying to dive into it with some traditional cutting tools just doesn't work. And so we've always fallen back on the manual serrated fishing knives as the go-to for cutting this stuff up. But I'm happy to say that we have a couple grants out, and we're really excited and hopeful that we may be funded this year to do a bunch of R&D work to develop a brand new super efficient cutting tool for derelict fishing nets, because it would be a game changer for what we do. And so shoreline debris, same thing. Entanglement is the biggest risk. Here's an albatross chick entangled in a net. This is also almost a daily occurrence where these Hawaiian monk seals will haul out to bask and sleep in the sun. But, they're just like any other animal. They like cover. So they'll seek anything that's on the beach that they can sort of nestle up next to. They're playful and they're curious, and almost always, end up in some sort of dangerous position with these things. Ghost net accumulation on the reefs. And so here's a little drone shot of us a couple of years ago. You can see in the top part of the photo, here's our two of our Zodiac marine debris removal boats. And in the lower part of the photo is a team of divers working on a derelict fishing net that's snagged on the reef down there. And so, as you might imagine, nets in the water are also a hazard to the wildlife. Monk seals are even more playful with these nets when they're in the water, because there's something new and different and interesting. And they'll use them sometimes as beds. This turtle's not tangled at all, but it's hauled itself up on this floating mass of line and net and floats, and it's just taking a nap. And so sometimes we'll swim up to things like this and think we have an entanglement hazard on our hands, but it's truly just a turtle taking a nap. This past season, we spent 60 days up in the monument, and we had a handful of wildlife disentanglements. And it really makes you think every time you come across something like this. Just back in October, we disentangled 2 Hawaiian green sea turtles that were on the verge of dying. And, you just think like this area is so vast, over 500,000 square miles, and you come upon something like this, how many times does it happen and nobody sees it? And so it's one of the sobering thoughts, but just being able to mitigate this threat is what we focus on. And I feel like we're doing a really good job, and we have a great plan for how we can really get on top of this problem and keep it that way. Here's just a handful of random entanglement shots that we've accumulated over the years. And our team, we are all able to engage in marine animal disentanglements as well if we find an animal like this that's in dire need of help. So we have all those permits to be able to do those disentanglement actions too with these endangered species. And so then the impact that maybe not everyone's heard of is the impact of the coral reefs. And so Here in this photo, you have a trawl net, that's drifted in from the open ocean and sort of plastered itself onto the living coral reef. And that's problematic for two reasons. You can have a net that drifts in from the open ocean and snags on the coral reef, and it breaks the coral off, fragments it, or it can snag and stay and stick. And when it sticks in a stationary place, it begins to biofoul. So algae will grow on this net, and the net will become heavier and heavier and less buoyant. And eventually it will plaster itself onto the reef and smother the coral. And it does that by shading out corals. It has a symbiotic relationship with a photosynthetic algae. And when the coral is shaded, it's just like a plant. It will die, it will bleach. And so we run into terrible problems with this, where you stumble upon a net and it's plastered on top of the coral. And then when you peel the net back, it's very much in your face what the net has been up to, the glaring white scar of dead coral underneath. And this problem is pretty bad. And so we can use all the help we can get. That's why we're trying to build this stewardship community. And if this is something that resonates with you, please visit the website. Hopefully you'll be interested in contributing or donating to our cause and to the work that we do. Sometimes you'll pull a net out of the water and it will have history of its murders of coral wrapped up in it. And so we had just pulled this net apart and we're cutting it up to load it in the boat. And here's all these little coral heads that had been ripped off the bottom and wrapped up in the net on its journey over the reef into the lagoon of the atoll. So to give you an extent of the scale of this problem, here's Manavai, right? So it's about 18, 19 miles east to west. And you see all that central area of the lagoon is that very shallow, calm, reticulated reef that I showed you with some of those aerial shots. So the reef itself comes within about a foot of the surface, but in the deep, darker spots, it can be, over 100 feet as well. So we call the center of this lagoon the maze, because picture trying to drive a boat in there. You could get lost and stuck in some of these spots. You get really buried back in there in the reef and have a real hard time getting out. So we call that the maze affectionately. And, the maze just so happens to be the hot spot at Manavai for net accumulation. So what you see here is a GIS layer, geographic information system. So we've overlaid those pink dots onto the map, and each pink dot is a derelict fishing net that we've removed. And what you can't see, because it's a small scale, is that there is dot on top of dot on top of dot, overlaid many, many dots on top of each other, the nets that have been removed in here over the course of many cleanups. And so just to give you a little more of the sense of scale there, according to a paper that was published by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration a while back, they estimate about 115,000 pounds, which is 52 metric tons, of just net accumulates just on the reefs of Papahānaumokuākea every single year. So for us, this is a constant treadmill. And so if we lay fallow for 1 year, all of a sudden we have twice as much to catch up with. And I'll talk about a little bit later our strategy for keeping up with this. But this is what we're looking at every year in terms of just the nets on the reef. And that doesn't include the stuff on the shorelines, which as of yet is unquantified, but equally as massive. And so that was the nets in the water. To give you a sense of the scale of the problem of the marine debris on the shorelines, let's go back to Midway Atoll here, which is Kuai. And so what you can see here, that Midway has 3 islands, Sand Island on the left there to the west, and there's a channel. And then there's a little island called Spit Island, which you can barely see. And then over there in the southeast corner is Eastern Island, which interestingly enough used to be the main runway during the World War II era. But it also, just by virtue of its location inside the atoll with the currents, does accumulate quite a bit of debris. So to give you a sense of the scale of this here, so we're going to zoom in. So here's Eastern Island there in the southeast. Okay, there it is. And it has sandy beaches around the entire perimeter. See the red segment on the very northern tip of the island?
Yes.
That's a 300-meter segment. Okay, so that's about 300 meters. And what that represents is about 0.7% of all the shoreline in Papahānaumokuākea. So less than 1% of the shoreline in the national monument. And so we've done a couple of studies over the years trying to quantify shoreline accumulation. And so we went up there and cleaned this segment last year, and we weighed and tallied everything that we collected. And here's a shot of our team just walking the beach. piling it up, bagging it up, getting ready to remove it. As you can imagine, all sorts of items that we find. So the punchline of this is that on that 300-meter segment, we removed 3,795 pounds of derelict fishing gear, DFG, and plastics. And so here's a breakdown of what we found on those 300 meters. And sorry, boring spreadsheet slide, but I think it's interesting to give you a sense of the scale. Plastic fragments greater than 10 centimeters were our most commonly found item. We found 4,600 of them. 1,300 bottle caps, 1,200 oyster spacers, which are a small plastic tube involved in the oyster aquaculture industry. 700 hard plastic fishing buoys, 626 small fishing nets, 318 beverage bottles, 285 other jugs and containers, shampoo bottles, that kind of thing. 261 foam fragments, 232 buoys made of foam, 221 shoes, and on down the list. And so it might be interesting also to take a look at that list and compare it to what you may find in California or other places on the mainland, because this area is the most remote end of the most geographically remote archipelago in the entire world. And so anything that makes it out here is really hardy, and it's been floating for a really long time. So we don't find plastic bags. We don't find styrofoam takeout containers. We don't find cigarette butts. We don't find drinking straws. And so it's a different subset of marine debris, I think, than may be found in other places. But I just wanted to show you that, to show you that little bit of shoreline and the scale of what we find on it. Here's just a handful of those 200 shoes that we found.
It's completely horrible. Every time you look at a bottle, you say to yourself, do not let that bottle cap get to the ocean. Do not let that go in. Okay.
Yeah.
Toothbrushes.
Yeah, just some gratuitous shots of our sorted marine debris, from that section of beach on Midway. Toothbrushes, strangely, and combs are incredibly common. There must be a lot of fishermen out there with really clean teeth, because I can't even imagine where all these things come from. And honestly, if it's made of plastic and you can picture it in your head, we've found it. Anything that floats will make it there. Bowling balls, car bumpers, motorcycle helmets. Lately, it's been a lot of interesting products due to a container ship spill that happened about 2 years ago in this vicinity. So we've been finding sparring pads and MMA helmets, and we've been finding Crocs by the hundreds and thousands, the Croc shoes, and life jackets, and really nice, Yeti coolers and stuff like that. But I mean, you picture it, we found it. It's kind of a treasure hunt, honest. And if it wasn't so sobering, it'd be really fun. And I do enjoy it, because I guess I'm jaded. But so that's the plastic. So same island, same cleanup. This red line here on the northern beach of Eastern Island represents 1.2 miles of shoreline, which is about 5% of all the shoreline within Papahānaumokuākea. So 5% of what we're dealing with here. And we clean this stretch just for the ghost nets, the derelict fishing nets. And so what we found there was 21,700 pounds of ghost nets. And here's a shot of us, working our way down the beach, just dragging net after net after net toward the waterline. And, and this isn't even an exceptional example. This is just life in Papahānaumokuākea, which is unfortunate.
And when you said you just dragged the nets, you mean you also took care of the toothbrushes and other kind of stupid bottles, but you're saying just the net part of it alone is
right.
That.
Yep, just counting up the nets and weighing those separately. Yeah. So it's sobering, but to the folks that are maybe used to seeing a bottle cap here, a cigarette lighter there, or maybe a couple microplastic chips on the beach, this is on a whole nother level. Which is why I feel like it's critical that we do this work, because such an important place for the wildlife, and the problem it suffers from is off the charts compared to other locations. So I just wanted to introduce you to our organization really quick, and then how we do this work. So here we are. We are the PMDP, which is the Papahānaumokuākea Marine Debris Project. And this is a shot here of the ship that we chartered to get to Papahānaumokuākea. It's a 185-foot supply vessel, and it has 2 cranes and a big A-frame on the back. Yeah, it's got over 100 feet of deck, which gives us all the room that we need for our fleet of Zodiacs. We have a fleet of 19-foot Zodiac Milpro inflatables that we use that are just ideal for this work, thanks to their shallow draft, super high load capacity, and stability. So we run a fleet of those boats. But the ship here is a wonderful platform for what we do. It has room on the back for these open top shipping containers that serve as receptacles for all the fishing net. And the captain and crew of this vessel are very intimately familiar with these waters, which is no joke. You know, navigating into a near shore location where we can launch the boats over the side of the ship is, you know, it's not for the faint of heart, and anybody that doesn't have local experience up here probably shouldn't be there. So we have a real great crew there on the charter vessel, and then the team we put together comes aboard to do our mission. So we're not the first ones to do this work. So just a little short backstory on the project. Actually, the federal government began the project back in the late 90s. And so I should add that Papahānaumokuākea Marine National Monument is co-managed by a couple of different agencies: the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which is federal, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which is federal, and then the Office of Hawaiian Affairs and the state of Hawaii. And so you have this management hui of agencies that have done a great job of pulling together all the management priorities and doing this work. And being so remote, it's incredibly difficult to get to these places and incredibly expensive. And so work in the monument has really just been the realm of the government because they've had the resources to do it. And so this project arose in the late 90s out of just sheer need for someone to take care of this issue as they saw the growing problem of accumulated debris. And so I personally worked for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration for 12 years, and I helped to lead the marine debris removal project for the federal government. And between 96 and 2018, that federally led project removed 2.1 million pounds of marine debris from the reefs and shorelines of the monument. But as things do, they change, and the winds of federal funding changed. And the writing was on the wall that this project, while it's incredibly important from a managerial perspective and a habitat conservation perspective, was actually going to dwindle away and die. Lack of resources there at the federal agency at NOAA. And so I took a big leap and I jumped ship from my secure job at the federal agency and started this nonprofit back in 2019. And it's been a wonderful journey, although I think if I had known how difficult and scary starting a nonprofit is, at least in the early years, the shoestring startup times, I may not have done it, but I'm glad no one told me, because what we have built now is a mechanism for sustainable marine debris removal in the monument. So we partner with all those co-managing agencies of the monument to get this work done. And so it's been a really great sort of public-private partnership that we've created to do this work, because it takes a village, because it's so expensive and so remote. We share resources because that's important. So anyway, here we are as a nonprofit, lessening the burdens of government in the 501c3 tax code as sort of some of the impetus for that 501c3 nonprofit program that I believe was started in the 60s. And so we've assumed all the heavy lifting of organizing, planning, executing these big removal missions to the monument. And so we're in our third year of operations now. We're off to the races. We execute large-scale marine debris cleanups in Papahānaumokuākea, raise awareness. And one of our biggest goals is to engage the greater Hawaii community and the nationwide community in the world in learning about this place and helping to solve this problem. We were only able to do a cleanup once every 3 years. And so we fell behind on that annual accumulation of 115,000 pounds. So this graph shows essentially how far the project has fallen behind and what it will take from us to catch up. And then once we catch up, to keep up. So if you just go on that number of 115,000 pounds accumulating every year, based on the amount that's been removed since 2006, we've fallen behind by over 1 million pounds. We've fallen behind by over 1 million pounds. But the gist of this graph is that there's a big backlog of accumulated debris on the reefs, over 1 million pounds. Sure. But that over the past 15 years, some of that may have grown algae and sank and been buried in the sand, or it might have been blown free and drifted free. And so we estimate, based on our qualitative observations, that only about 50% of that is actually still visible and presents a hazard to the wildlife. So that's the darker orange bar.
Okay, give me your orange graph.
This is our strategy moving forward, and it's not rocket science. And so if you could take a look at the graph, we have three elements here. We have the light yellow, which stair steps down from the left, and that represents total unaddressed accumulation of marine debris on the reefs of Papahānaumokuākea. So it's over 1 million pounds at this point. The darker orange, which sits just under the lighter yellow, represents what we think is about 50% of that backlog, which is what is visible, accessible, hasn't been buried or drifted away, and still presents a hazard. And so we're looking at about half of that amount. And then the green, stair stepping up, is our projected removal every year on into the future. And so we have a 5-year plan to be able to catch up and keep up, where in 2022 through 2023, we'll conduct 2 one-month field missions to Papahānaumokuākea every year, which will allow us to remove approximately double the annual accumulation. Starting in 2023, we're going to head for 3 missions per year, which will allow us to remove the annual accumulation plus 2 times that on top of that. And that's how we're going to chip away at that backlog and finally zero it out to a point where we're back into maintenance mode. So just real quick before we end here, how do we do it? So it's done with people. So this is our team this year. Just an incredible group of people. All of them live here and came from Hawaii. This is our last crew, and these are the folks we brought on seasonally for the field season from May to October. And this was just an incredible group of people. All of them live here in Hawaii, and they were all brought on for various different strengths and reasons that we needed their expertise. And so they came from all walks of life. We had people who were in the medical field, people who'd managed warehouses, we had students, we had marine scientists, and we had folks who didn't know what they were doing with their lives, but all contributed in one way or another. And so, we're so remote in this work that we do that the teams we put together have to be done very carefully so as to avoid having any liabilities. Everybody has to be trained into sort of a well-oiled machine, like tip-top shape, no chance for anybody messing up or being a safety liability. So we put everybody through over 2 months of training. And so that involves operating small boats. We give them a big, 8-9 day course on small boat operation, open water operation. And then we train them in free dive safety, because I should add that all of this work done in the water is done free diving. We don't utilize any scuba at all. And so having a team that can hold their breath safely in the water without risking blacking out is really critical. We're out there, we're our own mechanics, we're our own doctors. So we go through outboard troubleshooting and maintenance. We go through wilderness first aid. We go through emergency dive oxygen administration. We put these guys through the ringer. And by the time they get out there, they're a well-oiled machine. Here's just a few more shots of, training here in Honolulu before we head out. And then, like I mentioned before, we charter this vessel, the Imua, and head up there. This year, we did 2 30-day large-scale field expeditions. And so you might be asking, like, all right, we get to a location, like, how do we actually get to the spots we're going to clean up? How do we do this removal? Well, they'll pull this ship in as close as they can to the reef or the shore or whatever it is that we're cleaning that day. And then we'll launch our Zodiacs over the side with the crane. And we load up our team. We have a 16-person team. So each of our 4 boats, we have 4 people in. So it's a 4-person boat team, if you will, and head off into the reef, that we designate to each boat team for the day. And we got to survey, we got to find this stuff. Some of it's floating on the surface. Sometimes you can see a float, bobbing around on the surface, or a big net ball. But sometimes it's just under the surface, and it might have a little skim of algae growing on it. And it looks from the top of the water like the reef. So you got to be in the water. You got to be swimming to find it. And so we use this fun technique we call manta towing or tow boarding. You hold your breath. It's all done free diving. And you tow these little underwater wings behind the boat on 50-foot lines. And then we, using the GPS, we just do a lawn mowing pattern over the reef. And when you find a net, you come to the surface and stop the boat, and then you get to work removing it. So this is kind of a smattering of, an example of what it looks like when we find a net on the reef. Generally, they're pretty well tangled. They may be subsurface or they may be at the top. But either way, first starts with very careful entanglement. So we all carry folding dive knives, serrated dive knives. And the name of the game is not to do more damage in your effort to remove it. So very carefully peeling those nets back from the coral, cutting where necessary, and then getting it out of there without causing more damage. Once you've freed the net from the reef, then using lines, we'll haul it up to the surface of the water manually and haul it into the boat. And so these boats have to operate in areas of where the reef can be, even less than 6 inches deep. And so a very maneuverable shallow draft vessel is the name of the game. And the only thing you're going to be able to get away with up there is a true inflatable, not a rib with a fiberglass keel or fiberglass hull, but a true inflatable with a soft floor, because they just draw such, just that much less water that allows us to get into these really tight spots. And so, but the downside is that you don't have any hard superstructure to be able to mount a winch or any kind of mechanical advantage device. And so it's all done analog, it's manual, it's muscle power. And it's a great problem that we're trying to hack. It's like, how do we bring these massive nets into the boat without machines? And this is kind of a small to medium-sized net. Picture that times 10 sometimes, and how difficult it might be to deal with underwater and topsides. We load everything into a cargo net throughout the day when we're doing the cleanups, and then we crane these loads up onto the deck of the ship and into the receptacles. And like I said, each of these loads can weigh, anywhere from 2,000 to 4,000 pounds each day. And then at the end of the day, or at the end of the month, if you will, we head back to Honolulu, and where we have a partnership with Covanta Energy and Schnitzer Steel Corporation. It's called the Nets to Energy Partnership, where they provide free trucking and free roll-off bins, and we offload all the debris into these bins. They take it to their facility and grind it up, and then take it to the power plant where it's incinerated to generate electricity. So that's currently the best method of disposal right now that we have available to us on Oahu. We're on an island. We got limited options here for this stuff. They just have a big machine that chops up the biggest clumps of nets and plastics. And if the net is too long and stringy, it can cause issues for the incinerator. And so they just sort of grind it up into a homogeneous sort of mix, and then they can take it to the power plant. But I just wanted to run through, so in the last 3 years, since we've become a nonprofit, we've conducted 5 large-scale missions. And, and since October of 2020, which is really, the last 2 years, we've already increased the cadence of removals 9-fold over what was being done under the federal umbrella. So we're really happy with our early success, and we couldn't have done it without our partners and our funders and community contributors. So it's been a real group effort. But just to highlight a couple of the last couple missions since we started the nonprofit. Here's our first cleanup in 2020, 82,000 pounds. Here's our spring 2021 project, 94,000 pounds. Here's our fall 2021 project, 123,000 pounds. And then this season, we did a project in July and a project in September with 97,000 and 105,000 pounds removed for each of those, which puts us since inception at over 500,000 pounds removed from Papahānaumokuākea. I probably should have showed this highlights slide while I said that, but here it is. 202,000 pounds this year in 2022, 2,700 acres of coral reef cleaned and restored. And like I said, over 500,000 pounds since inception.
Wow, holy moly.
Looking ahead, like I mentioned, we're planning 2 30-day missions next year. And then starting in 2024, we're going to try to ramp that up to 3.
Okay. So what's it cost to do a mission?
So a mission's very expensive. It depends on the duration, but I'll let you guys do the math. A 30-day mission, well, I'll say this, it depends. It depends on how we staff it. It depends on a number of factors. However, on average, a 30-day mission costs about $1 million.
How many people are working on it in that 30 days?
So we take a team of 16 every time we head out on the ship. Okay. And there's no days off. Every day on that ship costs about $20,000. And so if we're paying for the ship, we're working. So it's we get a break every time we have to transit, a day or so to the next island. But for the most part, it's 24/7. We're on the job up there.
600 grand for the ship for 30 days, 20 bucks a day times 30 days is $600,000. And so what are the other costs?
Well, the other costs, so we operate this project with a paid staff, and we use that model because it's easier for us to recruit and retain exceptionally qualified individuals. And you know, we've utilized volunteers before, but it's really hard. Somebody that's not getting paid for a job, if a better gig comes along, they might leave. And we invest so much in our team that we can't afford even one person leaving for another opportunity. That, and also that I think it's really important to be able to open up this work, and especially access to this incredible place, to people from all walks of life. And if it's done on a volunteer basis, I know a lot of people that can't afford to be a volunteer, but would be a tremendous asset. So we built that into how we fundraise for this project, that we feel it's important. You know, we're a nonprofit. We don't pay them much, you know, barely poverty wage, but we still pay our teams because we feel like it's important for those reasons. And you know what? When you're paying somebody, you can crack the whip a little bit more and get a little bit of more muscle out of them at the end of the day.
Okay, so how scalable is this solution? How many, can you have multiple 30-day missions at the same time? Can you have simultaneous missions? Is this a matter of simply scaling the number of humans in small runabouts, boats?
You probably could. And it may get to that point where that makes more sense. You would need 2 vessels, you know, that we're maxed out on our ability to take 16 with the vessel that we use. There aren't many vessels available for charter, especially in Hawaii, that have the capabilities we need. So we've got a little bit of a limit there in terms of how much we can scale without bringing in resources from the mainland, which is, you know, also a possibility. For us, you know, that would mean doubling all our infrastructure. That would mean doubling our boat fleet size, doubling all of our field equipment and gear, and then also doubling our leadership team, because self and our executive director, James Morioka, have, you know, between us 25 years of experience leading these remote field operations, ship-based operations. It's quite nuanced and actually quite dangerous. So being able to run a safe mission is super high priority, which is why we invest so much in our people. You know, if we ever get to the point where we've scaled up that much, that would also need to be part of it, is the leadership capacity as well.
So at this rate, how long would it take to clean the entire atoll? 1,200 miles. That's like a big deal. So at the rate of cleanup of what you're doing right now, can you say it would take X number of years to do the entire atoll? Or do you say I have to increase my team size by 100X?
It is, yeah, there's a lot of area. However, over the years, we've really gotten a great sense for which areas of Papahānaumokuākea accumulate the most marine debris. So at this point, we have our heat maps, essentially, of where we find this stuff and where we don't, and where it's worth our $20,000 a day to spend. And so we do a lot of operational planning with GIS to be able to spatially map out where we do our operations, where we've done them in the past, what our yield was, and then to optimize our operations for the coming cycle. And so based on all of that, and based on our current cadence of removals, we estimate that we will catch up with the backlog of marine debris on the reefs up there by the end of 2027. And after that point, the reef cleanup should be able to go into maintenance mode, which is enough just to keep up with the annual 115,000 pounds. And at that point, we may be able to focus more effort on doing the same thing with the shoreline debris accumulation. So right now, there's a lot of it up there, and you could scale up very rapidly and spend a lot of time up there right now cleaning. But, you know, we're a new organization. We're not quite to that point yet where we can spend 6 months up there or more. And so we're going to get there. And we think we have a really good plan, and we've been very fortunate to have a great funding plan in place that will allow us a really solid baseline of effort for the next 4 years. So
wonderful. Great. Holy cow, Kevin, thanks very much for showing us such an impressive and frankly important body of work.
I just want to thank everybody for sticking with me this far.
Use your camera to pick up that QR code, and that takes you to your website where you can learn how you can give and contribute and be a part. Kevin, thanks very much for showing us the great work that your foundation is doing, and we want to get an update in a year or two. Thanks very much for story with the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Happy holidays to everyone out there.
This has been a presentation of the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon.